A very good morning. On behalf of Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, and Counterpoint researchers, I extend a very warm welcome to all our distinguished guests, panelists, and friends from the media. Thank you for being here with us today. Before I hand over proceedings to Professor Chirantan Chatterjee, lead author of today's report, I would like to briefly introduce Professor Chatterjee's work to all of you. Chirantan Chatterjee is currently an assistant professor in the Department of Corporate Strategy and Policy at IIM Bangalore. He has held the Young Faculty Research Chair between 2012 and 2015. He earned a PhD and an MPhil in Public Policy and Management from the Carnegie Mellon University. He has a BTech in Civil Engineering from Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee, and an MBA from Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta. After his MBA between 2003 and 2005, he worked as a business journalist covering corporate innovation for Economic Times. His research employs insights from empirical industrial organization, applied microeconomics, and strategic foundations of industries to examine the trade-offs between access, innovation, and welfare in global R&D intensive markets. He has published in global peer-reviewed outlets. His dissertation work was supported by the National Science Foundation, and in 2015, his research was cited on the NSF website. Professor Chatterjee has given research seminars at universities around the world, including UC Berkeley, Stanford University, University of Pennsylvania, Georgia Institute of Technology, London Business School, the Israel Strategy Conference, National University of Singapore, and Indian Statistical Institute, Delhi. He has also consulted for the World Bank and the Competition Commission of the Government of India. His inputs were cited by the Niti Aayog, India's Central Planning Authority, in a 2015 report on innovation and entrepreneurship policy for the economy. At IIM Bangalore, Professor Chatterjee has engaged in extensive teaching, creating and delivering courses at various levels at the PhD, MBA, and economic programs, executive education programs. These include Rise of Asian Economies, Economics of Innovation and Growth, Laboratory of Empirical Industrial Organization, Management of Technology and Innovation, among others. In 2015, he conceptualized and chaired the first India Conference on Innovation, Intellectual Property and Competition. This was a first of its kind international innovation policy conference in India. His deep passion for democratizing education has resulted in the first ever MOOC on healthcare markets in India in 2016, which is available through the IIMB edX platform called IIMB-X. Over to you, Professor.
Today we have an interesting opportunity to present in front of you findings from a study that we have been working on over the last few months. My co-authors Neil Shah and Tarun Pathak have joined me in this effort with some very novel data on the Indian mobile phone markets. I just want to set some context on this particular report. Basically, the initiative comes from my interest in what is happening to innovation in India, for which I had given some inputs to Niti Aayog. We know that the mobile economy has a huge multiplier potential for India today. And we also know that this has been true even in a world when smartphones hadn't diffused in the market. There's a seminal economic study by Bob Jensen, Harvard economist, who looks at Kerala fishermen and shows how their lives in the markets improved once they adopted mobile phones in matching their hauls to the local coastlines markets. That was in 1996. 20 years down the line today, we live in a smartphone ecosystem, and we also know over the last 10 to 15 days with demonetization, a lot of cashless transactions happening and people moving to mobile phones. So the point is that where are these mobile phones coming from? And should we also not become self-sufficient and technologically independent, not just in consuming phones, but also in manufacturing these phones? And that's exactly the goal of our report that Tarun, Neil, and myself have tried to document with evidence, not just hearsay. So that's basically the premise. We have a bunch of reports. I think I will hand over to Tarun and Neil to share, to just give you some prelude to the report, and we'll officially share the report soon thereafter, followed by which we will have a August panel from the mobile phone markets and the broader complementary infrastructure ecosystem, with whom we will have a panel discussion. There's a small bit of unfortunate news I received as I arrived at the airport, which seems Mr. Kant is sick. and he cannot make it. But we are trying to still source some inputs from him so that we can share it with the press. In his place, Ms. Aruna Sundarajan has given us a word. I'm constantly dynamically on the phone to get her here. She is in a meeting and she promised she is trying to come. So hopefully she will be here in the next 45-50 minutes, and she will be able to release the report officially for us, and we take it from there, and we also have a little bit of a slot allotted for question and answers. With that, I will hand over the dais to Neil and Tarun and request them to share some of the findings of our study, and from there we can move on as the day progresses. We also thank the entire media friends of ours for coming over and joining us today morning on a Monday. Please join us for lunch once the session is over. Thank you.
I'll just, in the next 10 minutes, we'll try to go over the findings or the highlights of the report and see how we set up the context for the discussion and the further panel discussion. So to start with, let me start with putting India in context of global handset market. So if you look at in the past 2 years, there has been a lot of excitement when it comes to in India. And when we talk to our lot of component players, suppliers, there's a lot of excitement when it comes to India as a market, especially mobile phone market. So if you see some of the trends here in the past 1 year, from the growth perspective, India is one of the fastest growing mobile phone market in the world. Not just the mobile phone, it is one of the fastest growing smartphone market in the world. If we compare it with some of the countries like China, US, Brazil, Indonesia, most of them are growing at single digit growth, but India is the only country in the world which is like growing at double digits. So what does that potentially mean? It is already the second largest mobile phone market in terms of user base, smartphone user base. And this also presents an opportunity for each and every player in the mobile ecosystem to get value out of it. So to put it in a number context, almost 1 billion smartphones will be sold in India in the next 5 years. And further segmenting it, this will put an opportunity of close to $80 billion of components will be consumed in India in the next 5 years. So $80 billion is a huge number and greater than some of the GDP of most of the countries, emerging markets. So how we are positioned, how we are placed enough to get this opportunity out of this 80 billion component market to make sure that we reduce our import bill and localize most of these operations. So let us start with the current status, how we are positioned right way as we talk in 2016 when it comes to the current state of manufacturing in India. So for the past 2 years, like if you look at, there are a lot of traction happening when it comes to Make in India, from almost 2 units in 2014 to almost 50 units have been set up in the past 2 years. And most importantly, if you look at the import contribution, that has declined from 86% to 33% when it comes to the import of mobile phones in India. So that's a significant number if we talk about comparing the past 2 years and the number of units which have emerged in India. And to further look at deep diving and segmenting these units which have come up in the last 2 years, we can see that almost 13 states are now competing as compared to the mobile manufacturing units which have come up. So this is good in a sense, like it has encouraged like states to get in a competition mode to capture these component ecosystem players to come into their states through the effective policies and everything. So there is a sense of competition within states also. Right now, Noida is leading with almost 15 units, and almost 75% of these units have come from Indian OEMs, followed by Chinese with 10% and 10% Taiwanese. So one of the interesting fact here is we have almost 170 mobile phone brands in India, and out of them almost 109 are already localizing. So it's like they are manufacturing phone through their individual route or through the contract manufacturing currently here in India. So that's a big number if we look at 109 units. So this is brief mapping of each and every mobile phone unit, either through their contract manufacturing route or either through their own route, how they are doing it. And this number looks good on paper. We have seen of 180 million phones being assembled in 2016. Everything looks good. What when we compare it with the world economies, like if we look at some of, there are close to 7 nations which are which are manufacturing mobile phones in their respective countries, and India's GDP growth out of them is the fastest. So how we are going to leverage on this fastest growth? So if you look at the value addition, the current value addition right now in India is still at 6%, and that is also one of the outcome of our research as compared to the economies like China, where value addition is almost 70%, as compared to Vietnam, which is almost 35%, and then Brazil, which is 17%. But the Indian value addition still lies at 6%. So what is the next phase? How we make sure that we should drive this 6% to 20% to 30% and compete with the global economies like China and Vietnam in coming times, because there has been a lot of competition within nations with respect to the mobile phone manufacturing in coming time. So regarding that, I'll hand over to Neil, my colleague, who will discuss about the next phase, like which are these components and what we have recommended in the form of like phased approach for the next 5 years in coming times. Thank you.
So that was a good context on where India is in terms of the opportunity which lies for not only the manufacturers, but the entire manufacturing ecosystem, right from OEMs to software developers to component players. So what we have done is trying to decimate what the actual local value addition is to the overall manufacturing in India right now. So if you look at the overall cost of a phone, it is very important to look at the cost of a phone, what constitutes a total percentage of the cost of a phone. That will give us a really good idea on what we can localize here, what we cannot. So if you see, the PCBA is the heart of the phone, which has all the microprocessors, memories, and silicon components. So that is one of the toughest component to manufacture here, because we don't have a silicon fab here to churn out ICs. But if you look at, there are many other components such as housing, battery, chargers. All those collectively can contribute to 6 to 17%, are very much low-hanging fruits which we can localize it right from component level, module level, to even sub-component level sourcing raw materials. Followed by display and camera, which is a mid-level thing where you need some semiconductor components, some fabs to manufacture display, which is display is like 17% of the total cost of a phone. So this is normalized across all the price bands in India and across the total percentage of components going into the phone. So in India, for example, 2016, total almost $11.6 billion worth components are going to be used in overall mobile phones, out of which we are just localizing just $650 million worth components, including the assembly cost. So that is why what we are proposing here is a phased approach on which components we should, which are low-hanging fruit, we should start localizing soon, right from, and the initiative should come from right from the manufacturing ecosystem as well as government to have prudent policies to attract the suppliers. So already government has started having differential duties for some components like accessories, batteries, chargers, but that is still at a very much SKD level, which is called semi-knockdown units. So you can still import internal components and assemble it here, but not the entire sub-component list is being localized here. So the depth of the value addition needs to go further. So the phase one, what we are proposing is the battery, charger, cable, accessories, which could take the overall value addition from 6% to 17%. But the main component in which the phase one, what we are proposing is the industrial design, the PCBA design and PCBA assembling to happen in India, because the industrial design, PCBA design is the crux of the entire phone. If you are a manufacturer and if you are a design-led manufacturer, that is a complete different thing compared to the manufacturer which just sources components or sources the phones directly assembled in China or some other geography. So that is what separates players like Apple, Samsung, and to the rest of the, because they are more of a design-led company. They have their own industrial design. So that is what we, the entire manufacturers which are not doing that right now in India should do. One is industrial design, then is housing design, and the PCBA design, and PCBA mounting and assembly, which can be done locally. The phase 2 is the next phase where we are proposing displays and camera modules, which corresponds to almost 30%, 17 to 30% of the total BOM cost, which can take the overall value addition to almost 32% by end of phase 2. But again, not everyone will localize every component. There will be still being imported because we need to have technology, intellectual property development as well in India, which to drive 100% value addition. Then we followed by display, camera. That will be the next phase. And through 2020, we are expecting the value addition should reach 32% if all these are localized, at least not only at component level, but at some sub-component level as well. The phase 3 would be more of a distant thing where we would like to have semiconductor fabs in India. It will take at least 10 years for India to reach at China level, where the value addition is 70% because they have their own fabs. And still, the number of fabs are still rolling out in China, and their silicon import bill is actually more than the oil import bill. So they are also doing conscious effort to attract foundries, and we should not stay behind for post 2020 to have silicon fabs and have key silicon components, which I said almost contributes to 40 to 45% of the total cost of the phone, to take the value addition beyond 50%. So just giving an example of how we can switch from semi-knockdown to component knockdown. So right now, all these parts for a charger, which goes into a phone, are being assembled, but are not necessarily sourced locally. Many of them are still imported. So most of those components still can be sourced locally. So there should be a policy reform where it encourages the manufacturers to do a component level, sub-component level sourcing as well as manufacturing right here in India. Similarly, for PCBA, as I said, the silicon sourcing will still happen. It will be in form of imports because we don't have a fab. But the PCB, which is the main PCB on which the silicon is mounted, so that can be sourced locally, as well as the PCBA design, the design efforts going into designing a PCBA, as well as the assembly. So that can have some contribution to the overall value addition, because the overall cost to a phone is almost 55% for a PCBA. Similarly, in phase 2, a display fab is really important because display corresponds to 17% of the total cost of a phone. We need a display fab, and already there are plans for a number of players to invest in display manufacturing locally. That will drive value addition considerably. So we expect by 2020 at least 50% of the phones sold will have local sourced display. So this is a chart where we have analyzed almost, for this research, almost 60 components which constitutes a phone. And if you see by 2020, the number one contributor, what we estimate would be a PCB in terms of total value addition, almost $600 million worth. PCB will be going into almost $20 billion worth components in 2020. So PCBA, display, camera, housing, and the overall design of a phone to be localized remains the key things which we need to, which manufacturers need to employ, as well as government has to have policies and reforms to drive that local indigenization. So if we are successful in localizing these components in the phased manner, I think our overall total localization amount over the next 5 years would be $15 billion combined out of the $80 billion worth components which are going to go into the phones in the next 5 years combined, which will take us value addition to almost 32% by the end of 2020. And with fabs coming in, semiconductor fabs and more display fabs coming in next 10 years, I think we can take the value addition to almost 50%. So just to reiterate the steps, which are the critical steps which will boost the localization. So the step one is already being achieved very handsomely with the Make in India program, where we are already doing SKD level, semi-knockdown unit level assembly. The next step would be to source and do CKD level, transition to CKD level assembly. Already accessories, charger, battery packaging is being manufactured here, being assembled here, but it needs to be sourced locally. The next step, the step 3 is critical, where industrial PCBA design and should be in-house, or at least there should be some design houses which needs to be attracted to open their shops in India, which will drive the smaller players who doesn't have capabilities to have their own in-house R&D and design. The next step, as I said, display, fab, and camera will also give you a next good localization boost to the economy. And we can at least start with the SKD level display and for camera, and move on to CKD level display and camera. So overall value addition can go above 30%, and which would be very close to what Vietnam is at right now. So the obvious benefits are, from economic perspective, are jobs. So we are estimating almost 150K or 1.5 lakhs jobs to be created in 2020 alone, which will be more spread out not only from manufacturing operation perspective, but also other industries like software, R&D as well. And these are direct jobs, what we are talking about. The indirect jobs would be more than 1 million if we have this entire component ecosystem set up by 2020. The other benefits which would, for the overall mobile ecosystem, would be not only for suppliers and manufacturers, but also for consumers, because once we have localized most of the components, get the overall logistics savings, the incentives which government can give, the overall differentiation which manufacturers can have, and the quality they can control because they're manufacturing it locally. That will give a really good overall value to the mobile phones and to the consumers, because there will be that will also prompt lower prices. Good because of it is done locally. You don't have any import duties to take care about, and again that will drive innovation as well, because more of the manufacturers will start investing in their own intellectual property, design, as well as different services which they can localize sitting here in India rather than in China or Korea.